Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought that I would give my little fight analysis, my fight breakdown, my fight prediction of this unification bout that is going to be happening next week. And of course, this unification bout is going to be the fight between that of Gennady Golovkin and the Japanese fighter, I believe, who is the current WBA middleweight champion, Mr. Ryota Murata. At least I believe overall that I am pronouncing his name right. And there may be a few other videos or a few other subjects also that I commentate on this week. We'll see overall what happens. But like I said, a couple of weeks ago, I believe, I wasn't really going to commentate as much until about the month of April. And the reason why that is because a lot of the bigger fights are going to be happening in the month of April. You have Gennady Golovkin versus Ryota Murata, which in my opinion isn't really the greatest matchup that I've ever seen, but it is a unification match. And of course, whoever wins this match, it's very possible that they're going to face Canelo Alvarez. That is, if Canelo Alvarez can get past that of Dimitri Bivol, which is a fight that I believe happens on May 7th. Bottom line is this: there's several fights ahead overall that are going to be happening that are going to be very particularly interesting. This is one of them. Jamel Charlo and Brian Gastano is going to be happening in May, I believe, as well. You have Amanda Serrano versus Katie Taylor at the end of this month. I believe also on the same day as Shakur Stevenson versus Oscar Valdez. You have several other fights all in all that I may be forgetting out about as well. Tyson Fury versus Dillian White, I believe, is happening as well. Bottom line is this: we have a lot of fights to talk about overall in a very certain amount of time. So it's going to be a great month when it comes down to it. There's other things as well that I could possibly talk about as well. Maybe tennis, maybe overall basketball and UFC. There's a very big UFC fight card that's going to be happening next week that I may do my fight predictions on. But let me overall just get straight down to the point. Let me overall give you my fight breakdown, who I think overall is going to win this unification match, how good of a matchup do I think this is, yada, 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 yada. Let's basically get straight into it. Well, first of all, just to talk about this matchup, I don't necessarily think that Ryota Murata, I don't necessarily think that Mr. Murata, I don't think that he's really an A-grade fighter. To be quite honest with you, it's really even a debate if Ryota Murata, if he's really even a B-grade fighter. You're talking about someone that has 2 losses already within his career and not even 20 fights. And he's not someone that, in my view, that when I take a look at his boxing career or his boxing ability, I don't think that he's someone that has an A-grade skill set. To be quite honest with you, you can even debate that he probably does not even have a B-grade skill set. And, when you take a look at Ryota Murata, what he really is, in my view, is that he's pretty much a bruiser. That's pretty much what he is. He's overall going to try to go in on you. He is going to take a certain amount of hits. But the big question is overall, can you take overall his power? Can you overall take the punches that he's going to be willing to throw at you? He is very tough when it comes down to versatile in the sense of, he can take some punishment. But Gennady Golovkin, even at this point in time in his career, we just seen Steve Rolls, who of course was that one black fighter, I believe, from that of Canada. And I said that Steve Rolls in that fight, that he was actually going in as a little bit of an underrated technician, because Steve Rolls, I actually think, is not the worst of fighters. Now, I don't think that Steve Rolls is necessarily someone like a Demetrius Bubo Andrade or a Jamal Charlo or, maybe one of those other fighters there, at the middleweight division that may be undefeated or, one of the guys that are reigning there as one of the top contenders. But he was a decent fighter. We've seen Gennady Golovkin, I believe, knock him out only within about a few rounds. So Gennady Golovkin, even at this point in time in his career, even though he clearly has lost a couple of steps overall in how dominant he used to be, when it comes down to it, Gennady Golovkin is still nothing to mess around with. Gennady Golovkin is still a person, all in all, that knows how to box. I don't think that he's the same boxer that he was a few years ago, because he obviously doesn't have the same corner. He doesn't have the same coach. That's not always necessarily a bad thing. But I think all in all that Gennady Golovkin was at his best at around that probably 2016 to 2018 mark, around the time when he was facing Danny Jacobs and Canelo Alvarez in those 2 matchups. And I think ever since that I've seen him after that Canelo Alvarez rematch, I don't think that he's really ever been the same fighter. The question is, can the Japanese fighter, I believe anyways, he's Japanese, Mr. Ryota Murata, can he take advantage of that? Maybe overall, can he somehow beat, overall win a slight decision? Maybe can he somehow hurt a Gennady Golovkin that is 40 years old and someone all in all that at this point in time in his career has been in a couple of wars and maybe lost a few steps all in all. And now you can see that, with his style, even though Gennady Golovkin, in my view, he actually is a very decent fighter when he was at his prime. But one thing I will say about Gennady Golovkin is this: sometimes he did rely overall on his chin when it came down to it, and also his toughness. And there are certain fighters that are like that. Gennady, in my view, he never was a bad mover. He never had bad footwork. He never had horrible head movement. But I'm not necessarily going to compare him to someone like a Floyd Mayweather Jr. Let me just say that you can maybe hit through him, here and there, or you can get to him because sometimes Gennady Golovkin he does rely overall on the art of taking a punch to get one in there, and some of the times it's successful for certain boxers. But now that you can see on the know that he's lost a couple of steps and he's getting older, you can tell on the know that he's now starting to get hit, and overall he's actually starting to get hurt in certain punches and exchanges that overall before he didn't used to get hurt in. So Gennady Golovkin, when it comes down to it, he is certainly starting to show his age. He is starting to show that overall in some of those wars, especially against Mr. Sewell Canelo Alvarez, that time has sort of got to him. So it just is what it is. So basically, just to keep things short here, or just to get straight to my prediction, is it possible that Mr. Ryota Murata maybe can hurt Gennady Golovkin in this fight? Can he maybe get to him overall, if he goes forward, which, let's be real, that's pretty much what Murata is going to try to do here. I think all in all that he's going to more than likely find himself against a bigger fish in this fight, or more than likely someone that has the punching power, even at this age that Gennady Golovkin is at. I think that Murata is going to feel the power against Gennady Triple G Golovkin, and he's going to say, wow, this is the hardest hitter and probably the most skilled counterpuncher and most skilled fighter that I've personally ever been up against. So I think that Murata is going to have a very tough time in this fight. I think all in all that if he somehow did end up winning this fight, to be honest with you, I think that it would be quite a miracle. And I know a lot of people, they may disagree with me on that, but when I just take a look at Murata, I don't really think that he has a legitimate chance of actually beating Gennady Golovkin, even at this point in time. But that just shows you the big separation in the skill and also the athleticism of the fighters. Murata, in my view, more than likely what's going to happen, I think all in all, maybe there's a possibility that in the early part of the fight that either A, he's going to try to outbox him a little bit on the distance while trying to get some body shots here and there, or, he's going to come straight at him. If I had to bet, more than likely he's going to try to come straight at him. And I think all in all, he's going to try to surprise him and maybe back him up, and maybe overall that's what him and his corner think is going to be the best of strategies. But I think once Gennady Golovkin really starts unloading his punches, and once overall he starts countering Murata, because Murata is not very good defensively, he doesn't have the best of feet. He certainly doesn't have the best of defenses and head movement that I've ever seen. And I think once Gennady Golovkin truly starts hitting him, I think that Murata is going to be in for a very, very, very rude awakening overall in this fight. But I think that, to be honest with you, with the way that Gennady Golovkin is at this point in time in his career, I think that Gennady Golovkin, I think all in all that these are pretty much overall the best fights for him now. Now, a certain amount of people may say, well, why would you say that? Why would you say that the best fights for him available are not, Jamal Charlo or Demetrius Bobo-Andrade or, maybe Caleb Plant when he was undefeated, or David Benavidez or someone else of a sort. The reason why I say that is because I don't think that Gennady Golovkin really stands overall. I'm not going to say that he doesn't stand a legitimate chance, but I don't think that he's the same fighter that he was from a few years ago. Basically, Gennady Golovkin, he's going to get one more unification bout when it comes down to it. And then overall, he's going to be facing Canelo Alvarez more than likely in another rematch. He's going to be facing him overall in a trilogy fight. I don't think that Gennady Golovkin really has any more than a 20 or 30% chance against Canelo in a third fight. And some may even argue that he has less than that. But at the end of the day, one may argue that it's somewhat good for Gennady Golovkin's career. It gives you the chance, all in all, to prove yourself against Canelo Alvarez for a third time, at least if that's what you want when it comes down to it. Excuse me. It's good for Canelo because if Canelo ends up winning that fight, which more than likely he will, that gives Canelo Alvarez basically, the opportunity to prove that he was the best of fighters within that trilogy fight, even though, of course, Gennady is not really the same fighter in that third fight. But at the end of the day, it will somewhat be looked at as a completion for Canelo Alvarez, if he overall is able to win that fight. And on top of that, Gennady Golovkin, this will basically send him off overall somewhat into the sunlight, or overall somehow, overall off in the background, with a decent ending. And some people may say, well, how is basically getting sacrificed against Canelo Alvarez overall a decent ending? Because there's pretty much overall no one else that you're going to want to get sacrificed against other than that of Canelo Alvarez. Because Canelo Alvarez, when it comes down to it, he's at least on top of the sport. You're going to get your money's worth. You're going to get a very decent paycheck. It somewhat appeals to both fighters and a certain amount of the other fans. You're going to make a lot of money when it comes down to it. And all in all, you're going to get paid. So more than likely, Gennady Golovkin, he's getting the fights that he wants. I think all in all that he was interested in the Ryota Murata fight. It'll more than likely hype up the Canelo Alvarez fight a little bit, which they're already trying to hype up because, of course, DAZN wanted that trilogy all along when it came down to it. So DAZN is more than likely going to get what they want. And Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin can finish their business. So we'll see all in all what happens. But basically, that's what I think all in all is going to happen. Gennady Golovkin more than likely is going to ride off into the sunset after that Canelo Alvarez fight. I do believe that he will win this fight. I just think that Gennady Golovkin is too athletic. I think that he's too strong. I think that Gennady Golovkin is too skilled for someone like a Ryota Murata. And to be quite honest with you, excuse me, if we're just comparing it all in all to certain matchups, because if you were to ask me directly, well, you say that Ryota Murata, in your opinion, that he's not that elite of a fighter. How elite overall, or how basically would you say that he is? What I'll say is this: I give Ryota Murata the same chance against Gennady Golovkin that I pretty much give Rolly Romero over Javante Tank Davis. Now, some people may think, oh no, that's taking it a little bit too far. What at least I'll say about this fight is this: at least Ryota Murata is actually a real deal champion. At least he's actually the official WBA champion. But to me, it's really not that big of a separation because there are certain fighters that have won belts in the history of boxing to where they're just really not that good. It just is what it is. And I'm sorry, but Ryota Murata, yes, I give him credit. He won the WBA middleweight championship, but let's be real. No one really thinks Ryota Murata is an A-grade fighter. To be quite honest with you, you would even have a tough argument on your hands if you're going to debate him as a B-grade fighter. I give him the same chance against Gennady Golovkin. Maybe you could say that he has more of a chance against Gennady than what, Rolly Romero has over Javante Tank Davis, just because Golovkin is about, 39 to 41 at this point. He's clearly lost a couple of steps, so maybe you could argue that. But at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, I don't think that Ryota Murata, if Gennady Golovkin shows up motivated, and if he overall shows up in his best version, at least that he can be at 40 years old, I think that he pretty much is going to knock out Ryota Murata. To be honest with you, Ryota Murata will even be lucky to last 7 rounds. It just is what it is. More than likely, I see Gennady Golovkin KOing him. Excuse me. I see him more than likely KOing him probably within about 4 to 7, maybe 8 rounds at max. But we'll see what happens. You never know. Gennady Golovkin did have a little bit of problems with that one last mandatory fighter. I believe his name was Meta, whatever the hell his name was. Gennady Golovkin, he may not even be the same fighter that he was when he faced off with Steve Rolls. So we'll see overall what happens. But anyways, this fight will be very interesting. I will be watching it. I will be giving a fight review. And more than likely, this is going to be a very decent setup for the Canelo versus Gennady Golovkin trilogy. It's going to be looked at, and they're more than likely going to try to promote it as Gennady Golovkin as a, recent unified middleweight champion versus Canelo Alvarez, who recently unified the 168-pound division. So they're going to overall set up the fight. It should be a very interesting fight. That's if Canelo can get past Dimitri Bivol, which I assume that he will, but you never know in the sport of boxing. You never know in sports in general. So we'll see what happens. But anyways, that's pretty much my prediction. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you all later.